The Blue Jewel.
Chapter 4. Completed. Tame sternly observed the guards. He did not like the idea of not being able to watch his lord, but today it was necessary for him to attend the meeting as well. So he chose those he trusted most, all with blood ties, first cousins of his. He had no doubt that if necessary they would lay down their lives for him and his master. When he passed by them, he did not speak to them. The orders were clear and concise: kill anyone who tried to enter the royal chambers. The order was clear: once the door was closed, no one from outside could enter. Disobeying was punishable by death. Jumel was thus expeditious, but it had always worked. Where others doubt, he never, with which he always played with advantage. Jumel was tall, very tall, far exceeded 2 meters in height. Even for his race he was tall. He had large green eyes and a pronounced forehead. His chin was square and a flat nose. But his most characteristic feature was a huge scar that decorated his face on the left side. He advanced vertically from the forehead to the chin. That scar was what he hated most in life, and hated even more the culprit of such a fact. Someday he would take revenge on that damn half-orc, but he stopped thinking about future revenge and focused on what is really important. When Jumel entered the room, his lord had already begun the ritual. In that state he was quite vulnerable. He would be at the mercy of any possible attacker. He did not like it at all, but had to accept the risk of performing the ritual as well, slowly taking his seat. His lord was in front of him. He seemed to sleep pleasantly, and certainly something like a dream was. On the table that separated them were 2 wooden boxes, simple, without any ornament or anything. One of them was already open, the other was for Jumel. His hands slowly approached the box to open it. It was covered with red velvet, and inside was a teardrop-shaped stone of matte black color. The stone was very easy to handle. You just had to place it under your tongue and close your eyes. Jumel looked again at his lord and placed the stone under his tongue. The effect was immediate, and he felt his soul leave his body and enter a kind of white tunnel. The journey was brief, lasting a few seconds. When he came out of the tunnel he was in a large circular hall of white marble. There were no doors in the room, as they were not needed. With his gaze he looked for his lord, who was sitting in one of the preferred places located to the left of the throne. He approached decisively without paying attention to the other attendees. He stood beside his lord, standing, as always. His lord gave a look of approval. Reginald I of Arceus had achieved the throne by his own means. Of humble origin, he was born as a simple farm boy and had managed to become king. Only Jumel knew what his lord had sacrificed for absolute power. Little by little the members of the circle arrived, great lords of the world. There was the great king of the elves, who ruled the palace of heaven. 2 dwarf kings, the grand master of the white robes. And many more people who did not know who they were, but surely important people are their respective cities and countries. There was always a figure that always interested Jumel, a wizard, or at least he thought he was a magician, in black robe and a golden mask. Everyone called him the Dark One. He was always present at all the meetings, but he was placed in a place alleged from the rest of those present. Jumel was interested, but everyone else seemed to ignore him. When Jumel once asked his lord about the Dark One, Reginald could not give him a concrete answer, but one thing was clear: if he was there it was for a reason, since no member of the circle was by chance. When all the members of the circle mentioned arrived, all those present remained in silence, observing the throne. It had a simple design, no crowns, no engravings. It was of a large size, made for a giant, but there was nothing that made reference to who occupied it. A white light appeared out of thin air, and before them a purple shadow emerged. Everyone bowed. The shadow lowered his head in gratitude and sat on the throne. The shadow was high, more than 3 meters. Only a silhouette of a well-proportioned figure and strong complexion was appreciated. Sometimes the shadow changed color or sparkled, but nothing more. Every day is approaching the time when I can return to Shanaris. But first it is necessary to discover who is the chosen one of the gods. Everyone was silent, no one dared to speak to a god, especially this god, the god of evil. He had many names, in many languages. He did not usually name himself since all those who were chosen to belong to his circle knew that they had only one choice, absolute obedience. Names were something totally unnecessary for them. But their lord, the king of Arcia, was a man made of a very special wood and spoke on behalf of all the members of the circle. Yes, my lord, we have spies looking for signs of its existence. The divinity observed Reginald. Although in the shadow you could not see his eyes, you noticed immediately when he was watching you, since all the hairs on his back stood up and the entrails were turned. However, the monarch was one of his favorites and the deity pleasantly accepted his words. And about my brother, do we know anything? Elaban, it has not been heard from for more than 1,000 years. A voice of authority entered the conversation. It was the Grand Master of the White Robes. The shadow under the head reflectively. He is on your plane. It is necessary to discover his identity. I have spent generations of loyalists to locate him. Time is running and it is necessary to find him. You must destroy both of them. They are the only things standing in the way of my return. Silence reigns again. Prophecy would be fulfilled and the god of evil would return to rule Shanaris, and only those who were faithful would be rewarded. The rest would perish under his great power. My lord. I speak again, the Grand Master of the White Robes. We have received news. They have found the last of the lost blue jewels. The shadow of the divinity flickered for a moment. It was a subtle change in color. It did it few times, but when it did, it is that something important happened. The triumph of Elaban will return. It's no coincidence, it's not. He knows that the time is coming. Find that jewel and Elaban won't be far away, and neither will the chosen one of the gods. I will take care of my lord, commented the Grand Master of the White Robes. Reginald looked at the Grand Master with some disdain. He didn't trust him. He didn't really trust any magician, but especially this one. He was too old and powerful. One of the most senior members within the circle. So be it, take care of the jewelry. I trust all of you. He only commented on the divinity. Then everyone present felt great pain, as if their skin had been torn off. Jumal opened his eyes, spit out the black stone from his mouth. It was hard for him to breathe. He hated going to that place. He hated it with all his strength. When he regained his composure, he looked up and looked at his master. His Majesty Reginald did not seem to sit so badly on the trip. In fact, he was fiddling with his black stone. Jumal, our lord has told me that we need you to go to Tripulia. Put yourself at the service of the Grand Master, but do not get involved. It is important that you observe everything that is going to happen, and then on your return tell us all the details. Listen well, no matter who you meet, don't get too involved. Just observe. What if the Grand Master betrays us? In that case, kill him. Yes, my lord. How long will I be in Tripulia? His Highness looked at Jumal with some contempt. It was not customary for him to ask questions when receiving an order. The time that is necessary, when it is time to return, you will already know. Once the first night was over, the road became quite pleasant. They followed the advice of the smuggler, took the road closest to the mountains. Arian was confused. At the moment she did not trust her new companions at all. After all, they needed her to solve a situation that the young woman did not know if she was able to solve it. It was a real madness what she was doing, trying to cure a king who had executed the previous doctors. They had a good rhythm despite the three of them walking and the company of a mule to carry all their luggage. The one who opened the way was Gosberg with a smiling air, singing and talking with the birds and flowers. Then Arian walked strangely, observing the attitude of the Denka. The one who closed the group and guided Kiona was the half-orc who walked with his typical serious countenance. The young woman recognized that what the Denka sang was quite ingenious, but to the half-orc to hear the squeaky voice of the Denka throughout the day was a kind of hard penance. The landscape of the plains was beautiful and simple, full of great meadows and forests that were lost to infinity. Beer was a prosperous and peaceful kingdom. Away from the continuous wars in the south and east, since they abandoned the ideas of expansion to the north, the trade of their iron was their main asset. Much more since the dwarfs of the Dragon Dorsal decided not to trade with men except with the kingdom of Olbiana. The reasons for this decision were not very clear, but the truth is that the shortage of this mineral increased the tension between the kingdoms and was not good news. Who did not have supply problems was the Black Empire that was getting stronger. Soon, if it wanted, it could launch the conquest of new territories, further complicating the situation. Fortunately, the position of the emperor was not so stable as to embark on a great conflict. Even so, the rumors spoke of a great war in the not-so-distant future, like those suffered by Shanaris in the ancient eras, but after all they were just that, simple rumors. They had barely been traveling for a few days and were about to reach the equator of the journey. They camped on the side of some hills. They were in the least populated area of the kingdom and also the most dangerous. They had found some remains of abandoned cars, a sign of the presence of bandits in the area, but Gosberg said there was nothing to worry about. Before nightfall they set up camp, Arian and Agnorok watching as the fire danced to the sound of a light breeze. Agnorok heated some water in a cup that when the waters started to boil added some herbs to the cup. "What is it?" Arian asked curiously, since I always saw him doing the same ritual every day at night. "Bitter black tea is a drink that provides a lot of energy. Can I try?" Arian was always willing to meet new plants and infusions. In fact, the best thing about the trip was to meet some new plants that did not grow so far north. The half-orc handed her the cup and the young woman tasted the drink. It had a harsh taste and her tongue itched a little, but the aftertaste at the end was very pleasant. Soon she began to feel comforted and relaxed. "Not bad. Where does the plant originate from?" "From the northwest, far from here. It is typical of the area where I grew up. It was the drink I took at night during the winter." "Where did you grow up?" asked Arian. I didn't know anything about the half-orc and now they could talk in a relaxed way. The half-orc took a long sip of the cup with his gaze lost on the horizon. "Very far from here, in a small village lost between the mist mountains called Vale Nevodo." Arian then thought of Caesarea, his home, sometimes missing it. "Do you miss him?" "Sometimes I won't deny that I miss him, at other times I don't. If I would like to come back someday, it is a possibility. Once I returned not too long ago. Well, I ended up fighting with an old friend." "Sorry." "Don't feel it, he deserved it." Agnorok sipped some of the contents of the cup again. They were silent for a moment. Agnorok was thinking. Nothing could be heard, not the singing of birds, not a noise. Agnorok began to get nervous. Arian noticed his partner's nervousness and they noticed a small detail that the two had gone totally unnoticed. "Where is Gosberg?" It was the straw that broke the camel's back. Agnorok tried to sit up and bring his hand to his sword, but it was too late. Something hit him in the head. The half-orc felt the blood begin to gush from his head and then fell round to the ground. Arian tried to scream, but it was also too late. What they did not know was that the prosperity of the kingdom of Beer had also attracted an incipient number of bandits who engaged in the lucrative business of raiding merchants on the route from Xeres to Tame. The king cared little for the moment about the safety of the northern road as long as the number of attacks was not significant and the important caravans were always well protected. In the end, those who suffered the assaults were the poor devils whom no one took into account. When Agnorok regained consciousness, he was tied to a pole. He was in an unknown camp, but it was a real pigsty. the environment gave off a very unpleasant smell. The head wound had stopped bleeding, but in return he had enormous pain in that area of the skull. He tried to find out where Arian was and heard the screams of the young woman. They were surrounded by bandits. It was a large group, more than a dozen, and they were groping the young woman. "Come, don't be shy. If you don't cooperate, we will kill your friend." Agnorok thought he was going to be killed anyway. The miracle was that he was still alive. Although some bandits usually kidnap people for very dark purposes. Rumors say that certain necromancers pay very well to have individuals with whom to practice arcane gifts. There are also cliques of vampires who buy victims to feed on. Sex look for victims for their dark sacrifices. Agnorok shouted at Arian, but could not see clearly. He tried to untie himself with all his strength, but it was impossible. Then he heard a bang and something falling to the ground. A huge silence was made. The half-orc feared the worst about Arian. If any of those bandits goes out of hand. Agnorok thought he heard something like, "Who the fuck are you?" Suddenly he saw a huge burst of blue light, a series of lightning strikes where the group of bandits was. Then some horrible screams of terror and pain. So frightening that Agnorok almost broke his arms trying to escape, but it was impossible. The half-orc had heard people dying many times, but this time it seemed that something was skinning their viscera. Gradually the screams ceased and a smell of burning flesh flooded the place. Agnorok saw a man crawling with his eyes out of their sockets, his face full of blood and his hair burned. He tried to say something to the half-orc, but the words did not come out. With his right hand he tried to point to something dark that was advancing towards the two of them. It seemed that it pointed to the same incarnate death. The half-orc had a hard time recognizing who the silhouette belonged to, but it was Gosberg or not. His countenance was totally different and his eyes shone with an intense blue hue. The Denka advanced with determination to the bandit. The poor devil carried a small crossbow in his left hand, with that weapon, and desperately fired a projectile towards the Denka. The shot hit squarely, right in the heart, but Gosberg did not stop. He just smiled slightly, and in that smile there was only terror. The Denka removed the ferret as if it were a blade of grass and continued to advance. The projectile had no blood. Both the bandit and the half-orc writhed in terror. It was not normal. That was not Gosberg. The Denka knelt in front of the bandit. His eyes flashed again with deep blue brilliance. He put one of his hairy hands full of blood on the bandit's forehead. Then the bandit's head exploded into 1,000 pieces, filling with brains and blood the half-orc, who screamed in a terrible way. Gosberg smiled, his eyes continued to shine. Well, they will not again disgrace the lives of innocents. But Agnorok couldn't speak. He couldn't stop thinking about what he had just witnessed. "Who the fuck are Gosberg?" The Denka smiled slightly. "All right, Agnorok, now that you know my secret, you only have two options, you know." "What are you?" Gosberg made a sign of silence with his hand and then untied the half-orc, who sat quietly trying to understand what had happened. Arian woke up a little confused. She was disoriented. The last thing she remembered was being surrounded by a series of smelly bandits who groped her with their dirty hands. Now, however, she was in her camp lying in place as if nothing had happened, but it had not been a nightmare. A pain in her lower lip indicated that everything she remembered had actually happened. "Madam, are you okay?" Arian screamed in panic. What spoke to him jumped back with tremendous agility. Then Gosberg and Agnorok arrived to worry about the state of the young woman. "Calm down, Arian, it's all over." The Denka approached and stroked her tenderly in the hair. "What was that? What happened?" Arian was a little disoriented. Gosberg smiled slightly and sat up. "We were attacked by a band of bandits and criminals. The truth is that it was a very dangerous rabble, but between Agnorok and I we managed to face them and we freed you before they did you more harm." It was more or less what she remembered, but the details of her rescue could not be corroborated in her head. there was only a fuzzy memory of a few cries of pain and despair, but little else. The young woman sat on her back on a large stone and put her hands to her temple. "Thanks, my head hurts." Gosberg motioned for someone to approach the young woman. It was then that Arian saw the subject who had scared him. He was small in size, a little shorter than the Denka, a large hood hid his head. The only thing that could be seen inside the head was large yellow eyes with the pupil of a cat. Those eyes were the ones that had really scared her, since on the whole she looked like a rather innocent being. Here I introduce you to Vanna Sigfry, a Kendeli who had those enslaved bastards. The Kendeli bowed with her head. A Kendeli, thought Arian. It was the first time he heard that name. Of course in the world there were creatures of the strangest and unknown. "At your service, madam." The voice of the Kendeli was soft and pleasant like a sweet whisper, just like the warm summer breeze that moves the leaves of the trees. Only listening to that voice Arian calmed down. "Don't call me my name is Arian." "As you like." Gosberg withdrew for a moment from the couple and lit one of their cigars. The Kendelis are tremendously educated and helpful beings. The poor woman, from what she told us, was traveling with her parents in a wagon when they were attacked by the same band of villains who attacked us. The bandits killed her entire family and left her as a servant. Arian opened his eyes. It was a tremendous misfortune. And she thought her life was difficult. "Sorry, Vanus." Arian got a little closer to the Kendeli, but she took a step back. She was very shy beings. "Thank you, sorry, Arian. But we can no longer do but pray for their souls. Now if you excuse me, I want to see how your injuries are." Arian was very stubborn and got up. She was not willing for someone who was in such a dramatic situation to be her particular maid. "Don't worry, Vanus, I'm fine, I can take care of them myself." Gosberg shook his head. "Today we will take a day off, tomorrow we will restart the march." Where the Denka went that had disappeared like the first time, but none really wanted to know, they were deep in thought. The three of them were left alone, Arian, the Kendeli and the half-orc. Agnorak stayed away from the girls, because Vanus seemed to be female, with an absent expression. The half-orc's elusive attitude was something that surprised Arian. He seemed shocked by something that happened during the attack. As she didn't remember anything, she approached the half-orc to see if he could give her more information. "Thank you for saving me." Agnorak seemed to come to his senses, although there was concern in his eyes. "It is not my merit. I was well tied and it was impossible for me to get out. It was Gosberg who finished them all." "I don't believe it." Agnorak nodded. The expression of the eyes of the worry half-orc turned to show terror. "If you ever see Gosberg's eyes shine blue, run away as fast as you can." Agnorak was silent. Arian understood absolutely nothing. Perhaps it was the shock of the bandits' kidnapping. But that Gosberg had finished off more than a dozen bandits was something he could not believe, although Agnorak's expression was forceful enough not to doubt his words. Resigned, she lay down again, tired and bruised. The dinner was prepared by the Kendeli, roasting some ducks that the Denka had hunted. Vanus did not cook anything bad. In view of the circumstances, surely this skill had saved his life. In addition, the Denka had appropriated a number of bottles of wine belonging to the bandits. Incredibly, the half-orc also drank with them that night, so Arian decided to join too. What the heck? Last night she was about to be outraged by some ill-born. Who barely dined was the Kendeli. Thanks to the wine of Gosberg, the climate relaxed a little and the Denka began to relate some of his many adventures. "I was once tasked with stealing the great diamond that belonged to the great necromancer Aldomir." The Denka began to speak while taking a sip from a bottle. Agnorak raised his head. He knew that name. All the treasure hunters knew the legend of that necromancer by heart. He couldn't believe that the Denka had come to his fortress. Aldomir, as they say, he lives inside an impregnable fortress in the middle of the eternal snows. No one has ever managed to reach it. Added the half-orc. I found that damn fortress and stole the diamond from that damn tunant who uses black magic. I don't believe it. Arian didn't understand anything, although he was amused by the conversation. He didn't know who Aldomir was, and about necromancy he had only heard tales of witches to have a firmer opinion regarding wizards who play with death magic. Seriously, Agnorak, I stole it. It was relatively simple since the necromancer is not what he protects the most with his legions of undead servants. So what is it? Arian asked. Agnorak answered for the Denka. They say that he is the only being in all of Shanaris who has a resurrection scroll. He can bring back to life any being he wishes as long as he has the corpse in body present. The young woman shook her head. Magical scrolls that resurrected the dead, that undermined the natural design of the gods. That is, you could steal a scroll worth the gold of 1,000 kingdoms and you decided to steal a diamond. Commented Arian, amused. And I stole it, of that have no doubt. And what happened to the necromancer? The young woman was increasingly intrigued. I left him there in the middle of his ice palace throwing 1,000 curses at me, the very memo. And the diamond? Gosberg lowered his head with a slightly resigned expression. I lost it in a dice game against a troll. The young woman had a fit of laughter. It had been a long time since she heard something so funny, and the half-orc could not contain himself and began to laugh too. They were joined by the Denka while the Kendeli watched them in silence. But, since you lost the diamond in a dice game against a troll, what's more, do trolls play dice? Arian added with a laugh. That story is much longer. Replied the Denka, laughing too. You're like a Gosberg goat, added the half-orc. Thus everyone forgot the fears of the attack of the bandits and slept peacefully. Agnorak woke up before dawn. Despite the laughter of the night, he could not forget what he had seen. For the gods who had abandoned them, what was Gosberg? Of course a simple mortal was not. A monster, a magical being. What suited the half-orc is that the Denka did not see him as a threat. Anyway, if Gosberg wanted to see him dead, he would already be, that's without a doubt. He would have to adapt to it and try that Gosberg did not kill him for revealing his secret. To calm down he decided to take a walk around. To his surprise he found after 10 minutes of walking a small pond of calm waters. It was not very big, about 6 meters, but enough to take a bath. The water was not very cold. He took off his clothes and sat down on a rock next to the pond and closed his eyes. It had been a long time since he meditated. Meditating was basic, with so much death and misfortune around him. If he did not do it on a regular basis he would end up going crazy. He had to put Gosberg out of his mind, and that terrible massacre. The images of the bandits dying and screaming flooded his head, but little by little they disappeared and the void came. It was then, when calm had already arrived, the figure of Arian appeared. The half-orc wondered the reason for that image. He did not want to investigate the truth further. He was afraid of the answer, without a doubt. He opened his eyes. Another day would continue. With determination he threw himself into the cold water and began to splash for a while. The truth was good. I had needed a good bath for a long time. Arian woke up. Gosberg snored, clutching a bottle of wine. Vanus slept like a cat, made a ball, but the half-orc was missing. Arian was still intrigued by what had happened to the bandits, and the only one she could ask was Agnorak, so she decided to go in search of them. It was not difficult for him to find him. He was in the middle of the water, splashing, like a small child, swimming naked. The young woman had initially decided to leave there, but curiosity got the better of her, since her brother had never seen a naked man. Agnorak's physique was impressive. He was full of scars, huge muscles, and defined as marble. He also sported a tattoo on his back. It was a simple design. A large circle with 3 smaller circles inside, forming an equilateral triangle located on the right side of his back. The half-orc sat up and she could see his full figure from behind. You can see if you want the other part, although maybe you would be disappointed. Arion blushed, but once discovered he couldn't escape. Sorry, I didn't expect you to be bathing. Agnorok turned and moved towards the shore naturally. The young woman turned around not to see him. She was quite nervous. You can catch a cold. Arion managed to say that she was trying to appear calm. I grew up running naked in the middle of the snow. Don't worry, having orca blood makes it more resistant to cold and heat. Arion was surprised. Agnorok had orca blood. The truth is that he did not notice many orc features, although now that he thought about it the cheekbones were a little pronounced and his eyes a little slanted. You have orc ancestry, I didn't know. Agnorok continued to put on his clothes in a calm manner. My mother was human and my father orc. I am a mongrel. Well, you don't notice much. Long hair hides my pointed ears and my huge fangs. I usually hide them from not talking much and opening my mouth little. The young woman turned. Fangs? Agnorok then opened his mouth. His jaw opened enormously, much more than a normal person would. Then come out huge fangs that gave dread. Now it looked like a horrible beast out of hell itself, and yet Arion was not frightened by what he saw. The young woman came over and touched one of the fangs. They are sharp. Agnorok closed his mouth. It could tear your throat in one bite. Arion smiled slightly, evidently asking him now about what had happened in the bandit camp was a bad idea, so I dismissed the idea. I would leave it for another time. Well, let's hope not. Commented amused. Let's go back to camp. Gosberg will wake up from his drunkenness shortly, said Agnorok. When they arrived at the camp, there was the Kendeli preparing breakfast, which turned out to be some rich flour porridge. Of course, Vanus was quite a discovery. Gosberg woke up shortly after without any apparent sign of hangover from all the wine he had drunk. And they resumed the trip. They began to enjoy it as a kind of pleasure trip. It was as if the bandits' attack had been a catharsis. Arion talked much more with the half-orc and the Kendeli about their lives. They all told some of their adventures. Arion recounted his life in Caesarea, although he did not comment on the duel and the reason for his escape. Agnorok told them some of his adventures and how he had grown up in Vale Nevodo. But he said nothing about his mother or how his father had died. For her part, the Kendeli told them about her wandering life in the world since her parents decided to leave their kingdom, although she kept the reason why they became wandering artists without being able to return to their kingdom. While behind them stood Gosberg in silence, sometimes smoking a cigar, other times carrying the mule, watching them carefully, something that disturbed the half-orc. But at night it was when the Denka became the star. He told them unlikely stories about his adventures, that time he won a battle using onions that ended an army of undead, or when a dragon had fallen in love with him. They always ended up laughing and ending up in a pleasant sleep. The road became busier. They found many travelers already making their same journey. The populations were getting bigger. Tame, the capital of the Kingdom of Beer, was a day away. They decided to spend the night next to a river. As always, after an evening of laughter and bizarre stories, all sleeping peacefully. Before dawn, Agnorok woke up. The half-orc knew the area. He had already been in this region of Beer before and knew that a few kilometers from where they were camped there was a large waterfall that was worth admiring. He did not comment since the road was a bit difficult and going the whole group would slow down the march. So Agnorok decided to go to the place before his companions woke up. What the half-orc did not count is that Arion was awake since dawn. The young woman could not sleep, worried about how she could cure the king. Where are you going, Agnorok? Fall asleep. I'm going to see something that is not far away. In less than an hour I'm back. What are you going to see? It is a waterfall, but it is difficult to reach it. Better stay. I want to go. Faced with the prospect that Arion was not going to give his arm to twist, The half-orc reluctantly agreed. They went out, and as the half-orc himself had announced, it was a difficult path. It was necessary to climb steep slopes along a path that was sometimes difficult to find even if it was the last hours of the night and the sun was already beginning to appear. Luckily Agnorok helped Arion at all times. After more than half an hour of climbing, the two were exhausted by the effort. When they reached the top, they caught their breath. When she looked up, Arion saw the most beautiful scenery of her entire life, far surpassing the forest of the elves. Before her appeared a waterfall of almost 400 meters high falling. The water meandered between the mountains, but the color of the water changed with each jump, sometimes pink, sometimes blue, sometimes violet. The half-orc stepped forward until he reached the edge and sat down. The waterfall of 1,000 colors. It is said that the gods created it in the first age. The color of the water is because the stones at the base of each waterfall are precious and each one is a different color. If they are precious, why doesn't anyone steal them? Arion asked. It would be a sacrilege. It is supposed that they were created by the gods. For the inhabitants of Bir, it is a sacred area. At the end of summer there is a big festival, since the great blue moon rises right at the beginning of the waterfall. People then save the water of the waterfall all year round. It is said that this water bathed with the rays of the moon has magical properties. It must be something very beautiful. Arion commented, and both of them were silent watching this show. It was a pity that the others could not see it. Unintentionally Arion's hand touched the hand of the half-orc, and so they were silent for a while. I don't want to leave here, Agnorok. It's the most beautiful place I've ever seen. If there is a paradise, it must be something similar to these waterfalls. The half-orc let go of Arion's hand and stood up with determination. I know, but the road must continue. The young woman continued to sit without any desire to return. What awaits us now? Something not so good for sure. Life is not fair, you know. Good people hurt other good people. And the bad people? Those are children of so-and-so from hell. Arion smiled. The half-orc offered his hand to Arion, who accepted and sat up. The half-orc stared at the flowing water of the waterfalls. There will be very hard situations in this trip, Arion, but surely you will get ahead. Arion came to Agnorok and hugged him. The two took one last look at the 1,000-color falls. Then they carefully lowered until they reached the camp. When they arrived, they found Vanus making breakfast, and soon after the Denkka joined them. It was the last day of travel. A little before noon they saw on the horizon the silhouette of Tame, the capital of the kingdom of Bir. Their trip was already over. Years would pass and Arion would live good and bad moments, but he would never experience such pure and simple happiness as that last week of travel through the kingdom of Bir accompanied by that peculiar trio. He returned once to see the waterfalls of 1,000 colors, but would never be like the first time. At that time Arion did not give importance to that week since he was very young, but over time, that memory was sometimes crowded before sleeping or when he watched the sunset, and whenever he remembered he never stopped smiling. Those moments were of pure and innocent happiness, that simple.